There's no money in my name. There's no bank account in my name.
You're not taking your husband's money.
It's going to be difficult no matter what.
Welcome to Tailored Wealth. I'm your host, Taylor Mavrakos. In my 10 years as a financial advisor, I have found that when it comes to financial education, women are always an afterthought. My intention with this podcast is to create a space that talks all about the different financial choices that women have to navigate throughout their lives. And today, I'm so excited to be joined by Kathryn Collier from Pinellas Family Lawyer. Hi, Kathryn.
Hi, Taylor. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
Thanks for coming on the show.
You're so welcome.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about when it comes to divorce and women. So about 5 years ago, I received a designation as a CDFA, a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. And the number one question people always ask me is, have you been divorced? And my answer is no. But I became really interested in helping women navigating through the divorce process. There's a saying that financial advisors always say where they go, I've retired 50 times this year, right? So they say, have you ever retired? How can you advise people on retirement if you've never retired? They're like, well, I retire about 50 times a year. So that's what I tell people. So I'm like, well, I go through, and you're the same way. It's like,
oh, for sure.
You go through a lot of divorces every year if you
all the
really
time.
think about it. Yeah.
Almost every day.
Almost every day. Yeah. And here we are still smiling.
Yeah.
But I was really thinking about it and why I found it so interesting with what I do as a financial advisor. And I really think that as women, divorce becomes the first place where we really start to emphasize specifically women in terms of financial education, where it's like plan A is you get married. A lot of times your spouse kind of takes over the financial piece of things. And divorce seemed to be that first area where I had these women coming in my office and it was like, we finally were intentionally talking about financial education for women. So I am excited to talk to you to both talk about the way things are and also talk about how they should be. And we should be prioritizing this a lot earlier, in my opinion. But if you don't mind, that's a little bit about me and my background and why I find divorce fascinating. Talk to me a little bit about you're the divorce quarterback, really, as a family law attorney. So talk to us a little bit about how you got into your profession and what you like about it.
Yeah, of course. So I graduated from Stetson College of Law back in 2017. And the first 3 years of my career, I worked in civil defense doing, the defense side of personal injury. I'm sure everybody sees the billboards for Morgan & Morgan. And I was the evil insurance company attorney they were talking about.
Gotcha.
But I very quickly became disillusioned with the old law firm system. Those places are built to be ineffective, inefficient, and to produce the most work possible because you're driven by the billable hour. And I wanted to pivot to an area of law where I could still use all of the expert knowledge I had gained in the courtroom, in being an investigator, and try to do law in a new futuristic way that would better serve the majority of people. So I joined Pinellas Family Lawyer in September of 2021. And since then, it is my life's passion to build the law firm of the future.
Ooh, what does that look like?
That means where we don't do law the same way we've been doing it for 100 years. We can take advantage of, new technology and AI to some extent. And hopefully one of these days, lower the cost of legal services so that more people can get access to an attorney, especially a family law attorney. I mean, these are the most intimate things usually in people's lives. I'm dealing with your children, and we're dealing with your finances, potentially your livelihood, your ability to retire, sometimes to even put a roof over your head. And it's still so sad that even in this day and age, there's so many people out there that need legal help that don't have access to it. And I most often see that between the people who, don't qualify for legal aid and the people who don't have the money it takes to hire a private attorney, whether or not they don't have the resources themselves, they don't have access to resources, they don't have access to family members that can help them out. And most commonly, when I'm having challenges finding resources for people to obtain an attorney, it is women. I get the call over and over again. I I really need an attorney. I need to get out of this situation, but there's no money in my name. There's no bank account in my name. There's no retirement account in my name. I don't even have any cash lying around. I can't get myself out of this situation because I have no money to hire an attorney. And I wish I could help every person who calls me in that situation. And I can't. And the law, the way it is today, is not built for us to get help for those folks right away. Sometimes they even have to initiate a divorce on their own without an attorney, which is never recommended. It is a complex legal matter, and you really do need assistance from an attorney, especially if you have children or any sort of asset, or unfortunately for a lot of people, debt. Maybe one of these days we'll become efficient enough that we can help more of those people, but the law is evolving, but this is an industry that changes slowly.
So to clarify, people have heard of public defenders. There's no such thing as a public defender for family law,
There
correct?
is not.
Okay.
No.
So what do you do if you can't afford an attorney?
Well, the family law section of the Florida Bar has done what they can. There are forms published online that you can use to file a case on your own. They're somewhat user friendly. I wouldn't say that they're wonderful, but they're a starting place. Here in Pinellas County, there's a self-help center at both the Clearwater Courthouse and the St. Pete Courthouse where you can pay a very small fee to have some limited help getting that paperwork together. But sometimes even people can't file a divorce because they can't pay the filing fee, which is about $405. There are some real financial barriers to access to the courthouse that just still aren't addressed.
And that's why I'm so excited. One of the reasons I'm so excited to be talking to you, because I'm on the opposite end, right? Where it's all about the finances. And I've never not recommended somebody go to an attorney just because of the intricacies, number one.
Yeah.
And number two, because I always explain that your divorce decree is like your Bible or your blueprint for, as you mentioned, your life after. And it is so costly and challenging to get any of that reversed once it's all set in stone. So I'm like, if there is a place to spend money, it's on an expert to help you with the process. And that's really why I ended up getting into divorce work, is because I had these women that were coming in my office, women that had assets. They had no idea where they were. If they did, they didn't have access to them. The majority of financial advisors are men. And a lot of times they would have a financial advisor that kind of just assumed that the man would be handling the finances or get the finances transferred to him. And these women couldn't get their advisor to pick up the phone and call them back. I mean, just crazy stories. And it was over and over and over again. And really what I explain to clients is, you delegate in a partnership, right? So a lot of times the women that would come in my office would feel such shame around the fact that they didn't have access to any money. To your point, I had several women that couldn't find the $400 to go file at the courthouse. That's happened many times. And their household can afford to do that. They just sitting in the office that day couldn't afford to do that. And so they have a lot of shame, embarrassment about that. And I try to alleviate that by just saying, you delegate everything in a partnership. You just are what they call the non-CFO spouse. Like you're not the one that was delegated the finances, just like your spouse might not have been delegated some other marital tasks, right? Do you have those kind of conversations with people as well?
All the time.
Okay.
All the time. Women come to me with a lot of misconceptions about divorce and about what it means, what has happened in their marriage and how they've gotten to that point. So we frequently have those conversations, and but I like to be really sensitive about people I find in that position, because they're going to be going through a major life change. A divorce is a major life change no matter where you're starting. But for women who have not been in control of their own finances, who are going to be taking on the role of managing their own financial lives going forward, we have to tread very carefully, because the law might tell us, yes, you're going to receive some assets. Maybe you're going to receive some alimony. But once I have a judgment that says this is what you're getting, that doesn't then do them any good if they don't know where to pick up and continue forward and learn how to manage these assets, how to make a budget even sometimes, and how to move forward with life that looks very different in a period of maybe just a few months.
I always kind of use the analogy that during the divorce, you as the family law attorney are like the quarterback, and I'm like on your team trying to help you. And then as the divorce ends, then that's where I kind of pick up that quarterback in terms of helping them with their finances. Because even just getting, like if it says you're entitled to part of your ex's 401k, that's great to have that piece of paper. But what does that actually mean? How do you do that? You know, and just making sure if you're getting alimony, that's great. Where's the alimony going? What account is it going into? Are all your new bills set up for your new life? What does that look like? So I just think our jobs really go hand in hand in a really nice way.
Very harmonious.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes even, especially when we're making a claim for alimony, sometimes it's hard for women to articulate or envision what expenses they're going to have after divorce. Maybe you've been in a marital home and you're going to be out on your own for the first time. And I'm like, well, what do you think you're going to spend on electric? What do you think you're going to spend on water and trash and groceries? And maybe they've not had an opportunity before to really think hard about those things. And, you know, not just the necessities, but what lifestyle have you become accustomed to during your marriage? Let's make sure we're planning ahead. Let's make sure we're capturing all those expenses so that when we inevitably go to mediation or go to court, we know how much money you need for you to be able to transition to single life. I might be the quarterback, but you help out too, because
I try.
Sometimes it's hard for women to think through those things because it's new and different.
So for the women that are listening that are contemplating divorce,
Yeah.
what advice would you give those women who are like, I don't even know where to start. I don't know if I can do this. What is this going to look like?
Well, I would say the first thing you need to do is make sure you have a support system, whether it's family, friends, people in your church, people in your community. This is a very emotionally taxing time. And I tell people all day, I'm not your counselor. I can give you advice on how to get through your divorce, but the emotional aspects, which are sometimes huge barriers to especially women from being able to participate in the legal process. They need to have a strong support system, whether or not it's just friends and family. I recommend that a lot of people see a mental health professional, psychologist, therapist, someone. This is going to be very difficult. So the first thing you need is to make sure you have that support and that you're ready to tackle this goal. After that, you really need to then think about, what am I going to do next? And where am I going to live? Do I have a plan? Do I have access to money if I get cut off? Do I have a roof over my head? Do I know what is going to happen with my kids and when I'm going to see them if I choose to leave this relationship? That's a real point of controversy. You know, who stays in the house? Who moves out? Do you live together? There are some practical things you've got to figure out first. For example, women commonly call me when they are contemplating divorce and say, you know, what do I need to be prepared for? Like, well, do you have money in your own name? Do you have a credit card in your own name? We need to make sure that you have a security blanket, because it might be months and months before I can get a judge to help you.
Do you have a rule of thumb number that women should have saved?
I don't think I have a number per se, but certainly they need to be prepared to cover expenses for themselves for probably 3 or 4 months, whatever that looks like for you. Because generally that's how long it would take for me to get a divorce filed, for us to comply with the financial requirements that are at the front end of a divorce, and then, you know, to either get to mediation and come to some sort of agreement, or to get to a judge who can then help you. So you've got to really be prepared for there to be a several month time period where you might not be getting any additional support other than what you've secured for yourself.
And I think, again, a parallel with our two professions is just, I've never had two clients that are the same. I would imagine you don't have a cookie cutter divorce. This is what your divorce is going to look like. I imagine they're all different.
Every family is unique, for sure.
So to kind of dive into some of the common misconceptions you mentioned earlier, when women come into your office and they are like, I'm contemplating going through divorce, what are the fears or the misconceptions that they have?
Oh gosh. If I had $1 for every time I had a woman tell me, my husband says if I move out of the house that I'm abandoning the marriage and my children and I'm going to lose all of those things. I don't know where this rumor started, but that is not true. That's just not true. You are not abandoning your home. You're not abandoning your children, especially when it comes to kids. If you're in a toxic situation and that is not serving your children, if that's not what's best for your children, you need to get out of that situation. And sometimes just the parents being separated is enough. They don't see the conflict. They don't see the yelling or the screaming or the disagreements or the abuse in some situations. And sometimes you have to consider, do I need to leave and take my children with me? And if you do, there are certainly resources that you can find, whether or not you're here in Pinellas County or in the state of Florida. There are people out there who can help you do that. But that's probably the most important thing and the most common misconception I hear. The second most common misconception is that the way that things are titled, right? Whose name is on the bank account, whose name is on the retirement account, on the car, on the house, that has nothing to do with whether or not it's marital. I get a lot of people who call me and they say, well, we actually don't have any marital property. Everything's in my husband's name, or I have stuff in my name, but he has more in his name. Well, good news. It does not matter. It does not matter how it's titled. So don't worry about that. And also don't assume that you have no marital property just because you don't have anything jointly titled. You probably do. If you've been married for more than a few days, you probably have marital property. You just don't know it.
Something I tell, especially women that come in my office, is they sit down and the energy is always, it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's just an overwhelming, anxiety-inducing experience. And the thing that I always say is I just go, you're not taking your husband's money. And
You're
they
not.
always exhale. And they're like, a lot of them start crying. It's just a really intense emotion because they've already been made to feel like they're taking, that they are not entitled to the same lifestyle or standard of living that their ex will be entitled to, that in order for their ex to maintain exactly the same lifestyle, it requires them to lower their standard of living. And that's the number one thing that I say in my office, because it's much more about the money. And in my office is just, I say, you're not taking any money. It's your money.
I tell people all the time, I'm like, the day you got married, as far as we are concerned with the money, you weren't your own person anymore. That's the husband and wife. You were one person together.
I love it.
What is theirs is yours and vice versa, except if it's inheritance or gifts, or there's some exceptions. But generally, for financial purposes, you have been one person together your entire marriage.
I also tell women that I talk with, when they, in that example, they're the non-CFO spouse is what I call it. I always say, well, if your husband is so much better at business than you are, that surprises me that you think that, when he doesn't understand that he entered into a contract when you got married. And that contract had terms, and you and your husband signed off on that. And to your point, it became a partnership agreement. So it very much is fair. We're not pulling these rules out of thin air. They're not meant to punish anybody. You know the rules of engagement going into it, with the exception of some legislative changes that have gone on.
Oh, sure.
But I always tell women in my office that, and I feel like it's a good reframe.
Yes.
Because it's saying, this is a contract you both entered into, eyes wide open, hopefully, which we'll get into that in a minute. But even if you didn't, you both signed on the dotted line and you entered into a contract. And like any other contract, if you break it, the terms still apply. There are rules for how things get split up. They change based on how long you've been married.
Absolutely.
Something I advise clients on that I want to touch on that you had said is, if you get an inheritance during your marriage, it's one of the exceptions to where, as long as you don't commingle it, you can keep that separate.
Yes.
But the minute you pay a joint bill of any kind, that entire inheritance then becomes marital property.
Yeah.
And so, especially when women are looking at like nest eggs, or if they're, you're 15 years into a marriage and you're like, I'm unhappy, but I don't know what to do. If you get any kind of inheritance, that's going to be separate. Just make sure you don't commingle it. Because I can't tell how many clients have said, well, I took my inheritance and then I put it into fixing up our marital home. So am I entitled to more of the proceeds of the sale of the house? No.
The law is pretty brutal, when it comes to those sorts of things, because you've got to remember the judge, when they're making decisions, if it goes that far, right? Lots of people settle their divorces between themselves through, mediation or negotiation. But the way the judge is looking at it, they maybe have 1,500, 2,000 cases on their docket. They can't take a deep dive into every situation. They have hard and fast rules. Is it marital? Is it not marital? If it's marital, it's probably getting split 50-50, unless there's some really special extraneous circumstances that would be appalling for it to not be split 50-50.
Right. Women need to have money saved.
Yeah.
Credit card in their own name, you
Preferably.
mentioned.
Yes. For those emergencies that you might not be expecting.
In terms of seeking out counsel of someone like you, a family law attorney, how many people should they be interviewing? What should they be asking them?
Well, don't go overboard. Find maybe 3 or 4 people. Preferably you should talk to somebody who's maybe been through a divorce or used a family law attorney. Referrals are the best source of information. Having somebody you already know, like, and trust tell you that they have somebody that they trust. And there are plenty of attorneys to choose from. So you ask 3 different people, you're probably going to get 3 or 4 different names. I have a lot of business that comes from Google. Google is a great resource, especially if somebody has a lot of reviews and you can look and see the experience that other people have had. I tend not to prefer the client testimonials on people's websites. They always feel a little self-serving. Look for the objective information, but interview 2 or 3 people or 3 or 4 people and find somebody that you connect with, that you're comfortable with, and that you have a sense of trust, because you are putting a lot of trust into your divorce attorney to know that they're going to get the job done correctly. And questions to ask. Man, people ask me all sorts of different things. I've never done a consult that's been the same. But what I find people asking over and over again is for me to explain to them, what is the process going to be? Like, what am I signing up for? What is life going to look like for the next 3, 4, 6 months? People often ask me, how long is this going to take? How much is this going to cost? I'm like, I don't know. I can't control what your spouse does. I can't control what your spouse's attorney does. But things that definitely are important are, what is your experience as a family law attorney? Do you do trials? Do you go to court? Have you been successful with other clients? What is your hourly rate? What are your billing requirements? How often am I going to get a bill? What am I going to have to pay other than paying you? Make sure you understand very thoroughly what the financial arrangements are going to be like with your attorney.
Some people hear, well, it doesn't matter what I spend on my attorney because my ex is going to end up paying my attorney's fees. How does that conversation go with people?
Sometimes that happens. Sometimes your ex pays your attorney's fees. Sometimes it doesn't happen. There are a lot of things that have to fall into place for the other side to pay for attorney's fees. One, you have to need them to pay your attorney's fees after we consider what you're taking away from the marital estate. If you are going to get distributed some money in the marital estate that you could use to pay your attorney, well, there go your attorney's fees. The other person has to have the ability to pay them. I have to find some source. There's got to be a retirement account, a savings account, a boat that is not used for business purposes. There has to be some source. And usually with attorney's fees, you have to wait until the very end. We got to get to the very end. Probably you're already divorced. They've already divided your property. We've already decided how are you going to split Christmas with your children, and then they'll decide about the money. And I'll tell you, most of the time, when people get to that point, they're already so exhausted with the process that it becomes less important. Like, it's really important to people up front. As they go through the process, the attorney's fees become less important, especially if, you've come up with money to pay your attorney in the meantime.
So there's no rule of thumb. If you're like, well, I'm not the spouse that was the working spouse, there's no rule of thumb.
There's no hard and fast rule.
Okay.
Very discretionary, but that's all family law. The judge has a lot of discretion. And we like it that way because like we said earlier, every family is unique. Every circumstance is unique. The judge has to have the power to make the decision that's right for your specific situation. Sometimes I win attorney's fees. Sometimes I don't.
I have a friend that's an attorney and she does civil litigation. And I had mentioned family law and she said, Taylor, there's lawyers and then there's family lawyers. She's like, the lawyers they'll do different things. Like they'll have business law attorneys, contracts, all these different things. She's like, you can overlap. She goes, nobody's overlapping with family law.
Nobody should be.
Family law, right? You either do it or you don't, because there is that more subjective piece. The judge you have, I've heard, can really influence what's going on. Okay.
Absolutely. I used to hate when I'd hear people say that, a good lawyer knows the law, a great lawyer knows the judge.
Oh,
and I always took that to be nefarious or have nefarious
that sounds
undertones.
corrupt a little bit.
It sounds terrible, but the more I do this, and I go to a family law study group. All the judges are there, and we'll talk about a case, and they will have 4 different opinions. And I can tell you, if you end up in front of this judge, they have a different opinion. This judge, they have a different opinion. So it's not so much that I know them personally, but I know what their position is on the law, and it is subjective. So you really have to tailor your case to the specific judge you're assigned to.
And when you say assigned to, can you control that assignment or no?
No.
Can you change it?
No. Yes, but you probably shouldn't try.
Okay. Why?
Having a judge disqualified is a very serious circumstance.
Okay.
And generally, you're looking for someone who is just blatantly biased towards your client. Like usually they have to make some sort of comment that shows that they're affirmatively disliking you for no purpose other than they dislike you. I've never had a family law case where I've moved to disqualify a judge because the circumstance has never arisen. The only example I can give of a judge disqualification, I was doing a civil case. We were going to go to trial. We were at pre-trial conference with the judge. We're going through the witness list, and the judge is like, uh-oh, I'm personal friends with like 3 people on the other person's witness list. Maybe you all should move to disqualify me. That is the only situation where I've ever had a judge disqualified. It's a very serious matter.
But I have heard when I've worked with clients and talked with their family law attorneys, they will say, you have been assigned to judge so-and-so. This is what to expect.
Absolutely.
Okay, gotcha.
Absolutely.
Something else I advise people on the finance side of things is a lot like what you do, where the questions, a lot of times the answer is, it depends.
Yeah.
Right? And so what I tell clients is, rule of thumb, don't fight over anything that's less than $5,000.
Oh, it's not worth it.
Right?
It's not worth it. Not one bit.
Well, you're going to end up paying $5,000 between your attorney, their attorney, because it's not going to be a 1-hour thing if you're fighting over it for that long.
Correct.
It has to really matter to you more than money, like an heirloom. If it's under $5,000, don't fight about it.
Don't. Just save your money. Spend it. Save your money. Go on a vacation. Spend it on your children. I don't need it. Not for what you're gonna get. And it makes me feel a little bad about it too. Just feel like I'm not being a good steward of people's money, which I take very seriously.
So now we're in it. Let's say we're in the divorce process. Alimony is a word that gets thrown around all the time. Can you talk to us a little bit? Just if I say to you, talk about alimony,
oh my gosh,
what would you say?
How much time do you have? Alimony is great in theory, hard to get in practice. The most typical situation where you see alimony is working spouse, non-working spouse. Generally, the non-working spouse has the burden to prove what sort of money they need in order to continue living their lifestyle. And that's where you, Taylor, can be helpful, because a lot of women haven't thought through that question. And whenever you're the party with the burden to prove something, you have to be very thorough. And you only get one shot at this. Like you said, it's very hard to get a judgment changed after it's final. So this is your one opportunity to do it right. So first you have to establish, what do you need for alimony? And then we look at the other person's finances and we say, what can they afford to pay? And alimony comes in lots of different flavors, if you will. But the most common one that people think of is durational. Somebody sends me money every month as alimony. That's great, especially if people aren't good with money. Having a recurring source of income can be good for them. Not preferable if you can get lump sum alimony.
Yes, that's what I try to get people to do every time if they can. Go ahead.
Yes, even if it's a little bit less.
Yeah.
Take the lump sum.
100%. Tell me why.
I'll tell you why.
Go ahead.
Lump sum alimony is non-modifiable. Non-modifiable. You get it. It's
Nightmare
yours.
over. Divorce over. You don't have to go modify anything. Yep.
Right. And then you can disconnect yourself from that other person and just be done.
Clean break.
And then you have more control over your financial future. And you can go see Taylor and you can talk about investments. And Taylor, should I use a house to buy this money? Should I put it in my IRA? Should I do something else with it? How is this money going to work for me?
And by the way, just real quick, you can pay yourself off of that money.
Yes.
If you get a lump sum, You can have a monthly deposit come into your account, but it's from you and not from your ex. Continue.
Absolutely. Because, when you go the other way, if you take the durational alimony, and sometimes that's all that people can afford to do, right? Yeah. Something is better than nothing. But durational alimony, it's modifiable. Circumstances can change. Your spouse can lose their job. In Florida now, we have specific procedures when someone decides to retire. That's new in the law within the past couple of years. The right to retire and to stop paying alimony. That's a big concern. And also, that person dies. Your alimony's done. You want to get remarried. Your alimony's done. Lump sum is a sure thing. Durational alimony, very much a moving target.
Okay, and let's talk about that for a second, because I feel like a lot of times when I am talking with clients, I'll say, I am not a lawyer, right? Yeah. So I always have you guys draft. I can come up with my Excel spreadsheet of assets and who gets what and looking at tax impact, but you have to have a lawyer that drafts it. And then I feel like on my end, I check the work in terms of the math and making sure that the math makes sense. Yeah. And I beg people to come see me before their divorce decree is finalized, because if you don't, to your point, it's so hard to change it. Yeah. And one of the things that I always make sure of is if you're getting alimony, you need to have a life insurance policy that gets put in place that on your ex. So that way, if there's an issue and your ex passes away, I don't care if your alimony's $15,000 a month. If your ex passes away 2 months into your alimony and you don't have any life insurance, nothing to be done at that point. Yeah. So make sure that you're meeting with somebody that specializes in finances, in life insurance, because again, you are invaluable in getting them to that divorce finish line, but that's not your life finish line. That's your life starting point for your new life. And what does that look like moving forward? And if you're going to do something that is still dependent on your ex in some form or fashion, you need to make sure that you are your priority and that you have yourself covered no matter what the circumstances are, because the reality is their life can impact your life. And what guardrails can you put in place before then? I had a woman that came in, it was a gray divorce. So it was an older lady that was getting divorced, and she had a pretty sizable alimony amount. Her divorce had been finalized, and I looked at the amount of life insurance and I was like, you realize that they didn't get you enough life insurance. Like, what do you mean? I'm like, if we take that lump sum and you take a distribution off of it, your alimony in her case was going to be cut in half what she's used to receiving. Yeah. And that's something where you can't go to your ex and say, hey, I know our divorce is over. Do you mind doubling the life insurance policy that you have? Because they're going to tell you no.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely no.
And I also want to clarify, and this may vary state by state, I don't know. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our advice today is general, but I do want to stipulate that state by state is different. So make sure you have somebody who is specializing in your state.
Absolutely.
To your point about being familiar with judges, somebody who's been practicing in your area for a while. Absolutely. So they are familiar with those judges. But then also, if you get remarried, alimony, you stop receiving it,
in correct? The state of Florida, that's an automatic no-go.
What if you're living with someone?
Ooh, what a wonderful question, Taylor. It depends. Okay. There's your lawyer answer. Florida law, specifically Florida law, provides that if you are in a supportive relationship with some other person, doesn't have to be romantic. If the person who's paying you alimony can prove you're in a supportive relationship, your alimony is going to be modified. It might not be eliminated. It might be eliminated depending on what the circumstances are, but it's definitely a gray area. I've been on both sides of those cases. Sometimes you can live with somebody and maybe you're romantically involved, but it's more of a roommate situation financially. You pay half the bills, you buy your own groceries. That's fine. I would say if you're going to enter into that sort of situation, consult with an attorney, because you're walking a fine line. And even if you are doing the right things, that doesn't mean that your ex-spouse is not going to start a lawsuit against you. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Another big reason why we favor the lump sum, because probably when you start cohabitating, there's going to be more litigation. Mm-hmm. And then more money that you're going to spend on lawyers, because that is a very significant proceeding. I've never been involved in an alimony modification that's been inexpensive, because it tends to be a very polarizing type of lawsuit. Nobody wants to give up their alimony, and nobody wants to pay it. Yeah. So there's not usually any middle ground. Usually a judge is making a decision, which is very costly.
Which, again, very important to meet and make sure that you're expenses are correct. Because if you say, I wish I had another $300 a month, well, by the time you pay an attorney, even if you get your $300 a month, you're going to owe that attorney a lot of money.
Yes.
So making sure that you cover that before you finalize your divorce, super important. What about child support? Now, if you get married, child support does not go away, or it does?
Child support does not go away because at the end of the day, the child support really, we say the child support belongs to the child. Well, that's not true. Children can't have money, but child support is certainly the right of the child. Something that I see that does happen with people, sometimes perhaps you start cohabitating and that other person is maybe not requiring you to pay for things like housing, water, electric. There is a mechanism under the law where your spouse could maybe impute some income onto you and have their child support obligation modified because you're not incurring the same expenses, but it's not going to go away. But child support always comes down to what is this person's income? What is this person's income? How much time are the children spending with each of you? And a number will come out, and that's the number.
And child support falls off when the child turns 18?
Great question. Sometimes, yes. And we always have exceptions, right? Most of the time, the child support is going to continue until the child finishes high school. So long as they're going to graduate before they turn 19. We're not going to cut you off because so many kids will turn 18 in September or October and still be in school until May. The obligor spouse is going to keep paying until they're done with high school.
I could talk to you about this forever, but we're going to run out of time. And
Okay.
I need to ask you this. We talked about when we're in it. Let's talk about how to avoid some of it with something. We talked about how marriage is a contract. What can you do to kind of mitigate the blow if the contract doesn't go well? You hear the term prenup, you hear the term postnup. Again, I'm just going to ask you about them and you tell me whatever you want everybody to know.
I highly recommend either a prenuptial agreement or a postnuptial agreement. Let me tell you why. Because the marriage contract you sign on the day you get married might not be the same 20 years later. We have people in the legislature who decide what that contract is for us. You know, up until 2 years ago, you could get permanent alimony for the rest of your life. Now that is a rarity. You're only going to get permanent alimony if very specific conditions are met. Now it's going to always be limited in time depending on the length of your marriage. You could have gotten married thinking, oh, if we get divorced, he'll pay me for the rest of my life. That is not going to be the case now. You don't know what you're signing up for unless you enter into your own contract. And the research has shown that prenuptial agreements or postnuptial agreements, and they're a little bit different in their requirements, but either one will probably set you up to have a more successful marriage.
Ooh, I love that. Okay. I always thought that just qualitatively, but I didn't know there was data behind
There's
it.
data behind this. And the reason being,
We're going to post that. Okay,
yeah,
keep
please,
going.
let's do. I wish everybody could be required to do or a prenuptial agreement before you get married. It's not like they're sitting you down at the clerk's office and be like, and by the way, do you understand you're going to give him half your stuff and he's going to be responsible for half your debt? You know, it's not like anybody's having that conversation. They're going down to the courthouse. They're excited. They're in love. Marriage is government. You know, there are rules.
Yep.
And if you can get on the same page about what your expectations are before you get married, let's do that, because it doesn't have to be about divorce. A prenuptial agreement does not have to be about a divorce. It's probably something we should plan for just in case, but we also need to plan for what if one of you passes away? What if you pass away in a year? What if you pass away in 20 years? What is that going to look like? Especially when people maybe are part of a family business. They know they're going to be having an inheritance. Very often, if you have children from another relationship, prenuptial agreement can be very important. But we also need to talk about what are the financial expectations in your marriage, in your intact marriage. One of the main things people tell me about why they're getting divorced is money.
And statistically, that's true too. It's the
Very
number
true.
one or number two. It's infidelity and money. And I don't know which is which. I think they switch off because that's what it is.
Well, I hear my qualitative analysis is I hear money more often than not. People who don't have shared values around money, it's because people aren't having the conversation. If a prenuptial agreement will get you to have the conversation about money, what debt why don't you tell me what debt you have before we get married? Why don't you tell me what your plan is for retirement? Are you going to live on the beach or are you going to live in a tent? What are we planning for? What are your financial goals? If people aren't on the same page about money, your relationship is probably not going to be long lasting.
That and financial betrayal I hear about.
Yes. $10,000 to the mistress in Cambodia or whatever. I've seen that.
90 Day Fiance. I've seen it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the other thing I always tell people is, because they say, but if you love me, you won't make me sign anything. And my answer is always, talking about money before you get married is just another method of making sure you communicate.
Yes.
And if you communicate and you enter into it, it's funny. A lot of times I become like the bad cop for these conversations. So one of the two people getting married will go, oh, I don't know, Taylor's our financial advisor and she says we have to talk about money. I'm like, I'll facilitate this, like a couple's financial therapist. I'll do it. And I just tell them, I say, we are entering this conversation with both of your best interests in mind. This is to protect both of you. And what I always remind people is, just because one of you earns more today doesn't mean one of you's always going to earn more than the other one.
Absolutely.
Okay, do you like prenups better or postnups better? You don't advocate for both, right?
I would not. No.
Okay.
No, that's overkill. That's overkill. One or the other. I guess a little bit of legal nuance. A prenuptial agreement is unique in that you don't necessarily have to disclose your finances. You could go in blind to a prenuptial agreement, but I don't think that's worth your time and effort. You need to go into a marriage with your eyes wide open about the other person's financial health. Just like you'd probably want to know if they have cancer. You'd probably want to know if they have other children. You should want to know their credit score and how much money they owe to people. I mean, assets is one thing, but especially when you get into a relationship with somebody who has debt that you maybe don't know about, those are huge red flags.
You're like, get a blood test and a prenup. I love that. Eyes wide open.
Eyes wide open. So I tend to prefer a prenuptial agreement. That way, if you find out you're not on the same page, you have not married this person.
Yes.
But you have to do it with the financial disclosure and have a real conversation about money.
I have heard that the closer you get to your wedding date, or if invitations have gone out, they can invalidate a prenup.
Yes.
Is that true?
That is true.
Why?
So the theory being, let's set the stage. You and I are going to get married and we're going to have this huge wedding, and we sent out invitations to 200 people and we've paid all the deposits and you've bought your dress and the flowers are ordered and you picked out your cake. And then somewhat romantically, 2 weeks before you get married, the other person says, by the way, let's sign this prenuptial agreement that totally works you over and says that I'm never going to give you anything ever. Well, we've decided that kind of is like duress.
That's the word I hear, duress.
Yeah. That it would be overwhelmingly embarrassing to cancel a wedding that close in time after you've done all of those things to prepare.
And also that maybe your partner knew they could get away with putting in more things if you were closer to your,
absolutely.
We're advocating for reasonable prenups.
Have this conversation as soon as you get engaged. Maybe even have the conversation before you get engaged. I mean, I understand people are like, oh, we love each other. We're going to get married. We're never going to get divorced. Well, marriage isn't about love. That's nowhere in the statute. That's nowhere in the contract. From a legal perspective, that's not what it's about. It's about joining yourself financially with another person. That is all that legal marriage is. People have other beliefs, but from a legal perspective, we need to be planning for your financial future because that is the contract that you're signing.
Okay, so let's talk about that because this is something I feel really strongly about. And I have absolutely no legal knowledge or expertise to back it up, but I'm going to talk to you about it.
Let's do it.
I feel like before either spouse agrees to quit their job to raise kids, they need to protect themselves with a document. Probably what you're going to tell me is a postnup.
Yes.
You agree with me?
Absolutely. 100%.
Totally, because there are so many people, women usually, that come into my office and say, well, 20 years ago, we agreed I would be the stay-at-home parent. And as soon as the love ends, right? All of a sudden it's, well, I have to fund you and it's not fair and you're taking my money. And I believe the only way to get around that is while we're in love, while we're so excited we're having the baby, protect yourself. Is that a postnup?
That's a postnup, 100%. That's a postnuptial agreement. anytime you want to enter into an agreement related to your marital estate, your marital property, because like I said before, now you're one person. But if you're going to contract about that, you need to comply with all the requirements of a postnuptial agreement.
So let's talk about like what that would look like. So it's not just saying, because there are statutes, right? So,
yes.
But in terms of, would you say, let's say I'm making $60,000 a year and I'm maybe going to quit my job to raise kids. Would you create a postnup that says I am due like basically what my salary would be if we were to get divorced? Or how does that work? Like what would that look like if you were drafting it?
Oh, very interesting question. I mean, it depends what works for your family. I mean, you got to know how much does your spouse who's going to stay in the workforce, how much do they make? How much are they going to need to survive if you all break up? How much are you going to need to survive if you all break up? Where are you each going to live? You have to really think about, and this is a tough conversation, and that's why it's important to have it when you're getting along and you're on the same page, because you've got to be realistic about what are your finances going to be.
Because this is the thing, is that, sorry, I feel really passionately about this.
Bring it on.
The thing is that love is great, like you said. When you are talking about quitting your job, you are giving up your financial power and your financial independence.
Absolutely.
And people do not understand that. And they don't understand it until they're at the point that they need it again. And they don't even realize they gave it away 20 years ago. And they have to fight to get it back. And that's what I try to tell people. It's not sexy. It's not a loving thing. It's just a cold, hard fact that when you quit your job, your kids are great. Your lifestyle is great. Your friends, whatever reason you're quitting your job is great.
Yeah.
But you have to do it. I'm not saying to not have stay-at-home parents. What I'm saying is that if you're making that choice, really understand what that means and protect yourself, or don't do it. Because if your spouse isn't willing to do that when things are good and you're making the decision, good luck having them do it when things are bad.
I think the best way to approach that situation is, in that moment, to have your spouse understand the value of what you're bringing to the table. Maybe your value, your contribution is not going to be financial, but you're going to be making lots of other contributions. And I would say, what is that worth? What is that worth to the wage earning spouse? And potentially, maybe you pay your wife a salary. Maybe it goes into her own bank account that you can't touch, and she gets compensated for those services that she's providing. Just because she's walking away from the workforce and she's choosing to take on new responsibility doesn't mean that what she's doing is not valuable or worthy of compensation.
But I do, tell me if you agree with this, I do feel that statute-wise, legislation-wise, it is severely undervalued. Like if you don't advocate for that amount, it's a lot harder to then say, well, what, we don't have an Excel spreadsheet of like parenting this much money. Is it per kid? Is it if your kid's on a travel soccer team and you also don't have weekends? Is it cleaning? Is it whatever the case may be? Like if you are the one who's the primary in terms of the family structure, we don't have a number we quantify that with. So you kind of have to create your own document so that way you assign that value to it, at least in my opinion.
Absolutely. And well, that just comes from having a very open line of communication about your finances generally. Like what do we spend on our necessities? How much do we have in money to spend, fun money every month? And how do we divide that up? What is mine? What is yours? What are the expectations? What are we saving for? All of those things have to be considered.
And the other thing I want to touch on is there are people that they say, well, we're married, but we don't combine our finances.
There's no such thing.
Say it again.
There's no such thing. Unless you have a very clear prenuptial agreement that you've followed to the T, because a lot of times people will come to me with a prenuptial agreement. I'll say, sorry, this isn't worth anything. If you titled things jointly, you didn't follow
listen.
You didn't do the things that your prenuptial agreement said you had to do. It's worthless now.
If you're going to make a big choice, number one, awareness that you're making a big choice.
Yeah.
In all of these scenarios. So number one, awareness, and number two, protection. That's really all it is. And if your partner loves you and you love them, it's just a protection piece of what's going on.
If you feel like you can't have this conversation with your partner, you're probably not really in a partnership.
So how much do these things cost? Like how much is a prenup?
It usually depends on the amount of assets that people have that we're trying to protect. But I think you could expect to spend anywhere between $2,500 and $10,000, depending on just how thorough you want it to be. But I also strongly recommend that anytime somebody is getting a prenuptial agreement, and especially a postnuptial agreement, if you didn't get the prenup and you want to have a conversation and get a postnuptial agreement, also talk to an estate planning attorney at the same time.
Love it.
Because all of that needs to work together. Because like I said before, postnuptial agreement, prenuptial agreement, not just divorce, death, and finances during the marriage. So you need all of those professionals to assist you. Transparency. That's what I tell people about their entire marriage. Transparency. It doesn't matter if it's your money or your children. Transparency.
And then my other question for you is, when you're working with people, I guess my question to you is like, what are we missing? Because I feel like we've gone over a lot. Is there anything where you really want to talk about it?
Something people really need to know about getting divorced. It's very slow. It's very slow. You will wait and wait and wait and feel like nothing is happening. And this comes back full circle to my comment about you have to have a support system. There are going to be periods of time of uncertainty where you're waiting to see what's going to happen. You know, you're going to file the divorce. You're going to wait for your spouse to be served. You're going to wait for them to respond. You're going to wait to get their financial disclosure. You're going to wait until you get to mediation. And then potentially you're going to wait a long time to go see a judge. And sometimes people have a tendency to call me frequently and ask me, Kathryn, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Anytime people deal with uncertainty, you know, obviously it causes a lot of stress and anxiety. I'm not the right person to talk to about those things though. But I do tell people, be prepared to wait. This process is not going to happen overnight, and no, there's nothing I can do to make it any faster, but you need to prepare yourself for that. You could call me every day if you wanted to, but that's going to get really pricey really quickly, and it's probably not going to be as valuable.
I have a lot of people that say I want to wait till after the holidays to file. Is there a right time of year to start this process?
No.
Okay.
No.
One's not better than the other.
You know, I have a lot of people tell me about the holiday thing as well. I'm like, well, if it's...
But it starts in like September. They're like, well, I can't till after the holidays. I'm like, okay, so we're going to wait like almost 6 months?
Yes. And I hear that all of the time. And I'm like, well, it's going to be a long process. It kind of comes back to what we were talking about originally. Like, what are you going to do? What is your living situation going to be? Are you going to stay in a bad situation in a home together where you have conflict just because you're going to get through the holidays where you're probably going to be miserable? Or are you going to swallow the pill? Are you going to file? Are you going to choose to move out? And yes, well, I'll tell you, the holidays, whether or not it's Christmas, 4th of July, Easter, it doesn't matter what holiday you file around.
They're always coming, those holidays.
They're always coming. And the first one, the first year, the second year, it's going to be difficult no matter what, whether or not you filed or not. I tell people it's kind of like a Band-Aid. You kind of have to rip it off, especially once you've decided for sure that that's what you're going to do. And I definitely never push anybody to get divorced. I'm not a pushy salesperson in that way. If you can save your marriage, if you can go to counseling, especially if you have children, if you can make it work in a healthy way, that is my first option for people, you know. But, you know, once you're sure it's not going to work, it's better to just get out of it. It's not getting any better. It's probably only going to get worse. I would say probably don't wait. Just get it started.
As a financial advisor, my poor man's prenup, if you will, is I have people just take a screenshot of their accounts the day that they get married. So at least they know what their assets were prior, because sometimes your spouse is only entitled to the appreciation on certain accounts.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if you are in a spot where you're like, I don't know if I want to pay for a prenup, I don't know if I need it, or I'm really close to my wedding, what's like a quick fix? It's not a total fix, but it's something that you can do.
It's more than nothing. Absolutely. Because I have people get into situations, they're like, well, I actually started my IRA 5 years before I got married or 2 years before I got married. I'm like, great. Do you have a statement? Can you tell me what was in there the day you got married? And most people, you know, cannot do that. So that is a wonderful suggestion. I love that.
Great. Yeah. Because a lot of people that I see, they've been married for like 20 years. Some of them, the broker dealers they started at, they're like, that broker dealer doesn't exist anymore. I can't get a statement. So if you can, save a statement from when you got married. Same with, you mentioned family businesses. Get a valuation before you get married, so that way you have some kind of basis on, or if you have a home or something like that, figure out what that valuation is
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of just my starter kit. I'm not an attorney. Legal.
No, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that because you're absolutely right. For anything you own before the marriage, we're looking at appreciation. And if we're doing it in hindsight, especially if, 10, 15, 20 years have passed, probably appreciation is going to become the entire value of whatever that asset is, because you got to have evidence to prove what the value was on the date you got married. Nearly impossible for me to come up with that evidence.
And the flip side, student loan debt. If you had it before you got married, if you get divorced, does your spouse assume any of that student loan debt?
That is a wonderful question, Taylor, and it has a complicated answer. If you acquire all of your student debt before you get married, it is yours forever. Yay. If you acquire it during the marriage, it's going to be marital to some effect. Most of the time, people will take on their own student loan debt. Considering the different government programs that there are for repayment, it tends to be a non-issue for people. But I did have an occasion where there was significant student loan debt acquired during the marriage. They argued that the promissory note had been signed before the marriage, and therefore it was all premarital. And we came to an agreement, so I never got to litigate that issue. But just know that, especially if you have student loan debt that straddles.
I've had that happen with clients. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You might want to really take a hard look at that and really look closely at the terms of your repayment to make sure you know what that's going to look like.
So I had a case where it was a pharmacist, and her husband, she kind of paid for all of his grad school. And then at the end, he said he wanted to get divorced, like as she made the last payment. It was terrible. And he was like, and by the way, you're going to owe me all this alimony, because that's what people, I'm like,
that's
okay,
what people say.
That's what people say. So I sit down with both of them and I go, you do realize a lot of this pharmacy school debt was while you were married. He's like, what does that mean? I'm like, well, it means that you're partially responsible for it. So tell me if my thinking on this is correct, because sometimes I have clients who, well, a lot of clients are already financial advising clients that go through divorce. I have some people that come to me post-divorce and want a financial advisor, which is the most anxiety-inducing for me because I can't fix it. Like that life insurance example, I'm like, we got to go by what the blueprint says most of the time. But for those in-between people, sometimes they come to me first and sometimes they come to you first. If they come to me first, I always advise a family law attorney, and have them interview a few people, right? But when they come to me first, what I'll say is I'll make kind of just a rough, kind of like what an equitable distribution schedule would look like. So that's just a fancy way of saying, what are your assets? What are your liabilities? What's each of your income? And if they don't have kids, they can get a lot done. And they don't have minor kids, I should say that. If they don't have minor kids, they can get a lot of the divorce figured out at my office. And they go, oh, this is so great. You figured out most of it. I'm like, please take this piece of paper, go to the attorney. And the attorney is the one that should always be drafting those documents for you. It's great to have somebody who's on the finance side of it, just because equitable doesn't mean equal.
Correct.
If you are both 40 years old and one 40-year-old gets all the retirement assets and one person gets all of the non-retirement assets, you've got a problem, because those assets in the IRA, the retirement account, are not accessible to you without income tax and penalty. The way I always explain it is, if you have a fridge and it's got meat and vegetables in it, you can divide the fridge 50-50. But if the vegetarian gets all the steak and the meat eater gets all the vegetables, it's equal, but it's not equitable. So having that finance person is really important to make sure that it's backing up what the legal team is doing. But then on the flip side of that, what I always also say is, it's going to be more involved if you've got any kind of child custody, anything like that. That's just not something. It's not my wheelhouse. That's all you, girl.
It's nobody's wheelhouse.
Oh.
I mean, it's
got to be hard.
Difficult. And people come to me with all sorts of parenting relationships. Some people have wonderful co-parenting relationships. Some people have abysmal co-parenting relationships. Our strategy in every dissolution that has minor children is to take care of those parenting issues first, because a lot of times people can't move past those issues to address the financial issues until they know what is going to happen with their children. I mean, rightly so. If I hear from somebody that their children aren't their most important concern, I'm probably having some second questions about, or second guessing whether or not I want them as a client. But yes, you really have to resolve the parenting issues first before you can even have a financial discussion. Once we know the parenting schedule, we're going to know the child support. That's probably going to be something taken into account, especially from an alimony perspective. How much of, your expenses or your children's expenses are going to be covered by that support? And does that reduce your spouse's ability to pay you spousal support or alimony, whatever the case may be? Money is not all created equal. Mm-hmm. Equity in a house is great. Money in a retirement account is great. But if it's not going to work for you the way you need it to, so that's why I do rely on financial professionals. I don't know all of the answers to those questions. I can't be a master of everything. You can't.
Same here. And I wanted to add this as just a little tax piece of information for everybody is you are filing as whatever tax status you are on the last day of the year. So if you get your divorce finalized and it gets finalized in November, you're filing the next year as single or head of household depending. So it'll be something to where just be really mindful of whatever you are in the last day of the year. That's how you're going to be filing your taxes.
Definitely a big consideration for some people as well. Sometimes it's very advantageous to be able to file jointly one more year. If you can get on the same page about it, I tell people all the time, I can't make the other person do what the judge said they're going to do. Sometimes people go off the rails. But again, I tell everybody, I don't know anything about taxes except to tell you to go talk to somebody who does. 100%, because there are real implications with the taxes that sometimes I feel like in the routine course of family law, especially if you have a trial with a judge, some things are going to be overlooked unless you very specifically bring that to the judge's attention.
Figure out who's listing your kids as dependents on their tax return, because you will fight about it till the end of time if you don't get it figured out. The only tax returns I ever have that get rejected at my office say this social security number has already been used.
Yes.
And those are my least favorite. I hold the phone far away from me as I call and announce that to the person who filed, because they're mad that their ex took the child exemption for that child. So Make sure the more you can spell out, whether you're amicable or not, the day you get divorced, you might not be once somebody gets a girlfriend, boyfriend, so make sure that when you file and you finalize everything, get as much written down as possible so you can go back to that. Do people do amendments to postnuptial agreements, or do you get a brand new one every time?
No, you can do an amendment.
Okay.
You can. But anytime you're going to do an amendment, you're going to have to do your financial disclosure again. You've revested new rights, and now you're contemplating giving up new rights, and you need to do a financial disclosure again. But to your point about who's going to file on the kids on the taxes, this is a big hot button issue. And if you don't have it laid out in your marital settlement agreement, you're going to have lots of conflict down the road because, we won't get into what the IRS says, but that is, I think if I have people call me for contempt issues, people who have done something that they weren't supposed to do, filing with a child on taxes is like the number one thing that people call for. And, I hear them, but the kid spent most of the year with them, even though our marital settlement agreement says I was supposed to claim them. I'm like, the judgment is the law as it applies to you. You need to follow the law. And so that is a real hot button issue, and make sure you really understand what your obligations are, because there might even be tax forms that you need to fill out each year if you're alternating a child, especially.
There's a form to swap. Yep. Kathryn, what a delight.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to have you on. I'm so happy that you are just a champion in that divorce process. We need more women like you. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Taylor.
Absolutely. So tell everybody where they can find you.
Oh, the name of my firm is Pinellas Family Lawyer, and it's very exciting. www.pinellasfamilylawyer.com. You can read more about me. You can read blogs that we've written, especially if you're exploring the divorce process. There's lots of great information there. And I think you can follow us on Facebook, but my website is probably the best place to find me.
Well, thank you so much. I cannot recommend Kathryn and her team enough. So thank you for being here and for everything that you do.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
And thank you all for listening today. Until next time, remember, wealth suits you better when it's tailored. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through MFP Financial Services LLC, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from LPL Financial. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Kathryn Collier and her company are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or MFP Financial Services LLC.